Today I'm going to be reviewing the Caran Museum Aquarelle watercolor pencils and doing a demonstration using these. Find out if these pencils are going to be a good choice for you. It's official. I'm in love with watercolor pencils. Both these and the Derwent I absolutely love. The Derwent feel more like a traditional what I would expect with watercolor, whereas the Caran feel more like wash to me. They're very, very opaque, or much, much more so than the Derwent. I'll do a full review comparing the two, doing the side-by-side project in the future. But these pencils, I was surprised at how opaque they were. I liked a lot about them. I liked a lot of the looks that I could create with them. And it's very easy, I think, to fix mistakes with these because there's so much opacity. If something went wrong, I could cover it up fairly easily. I loved that about them. These are considered to be one of the more light, fast pencils. With any of these watercolor pencils, the companies are generally testing the pencil when dry. But it's a watercolor pencil. We're going to add water. And once you add water, that light fast rating is not necessarily going to be the same. So that's something that you need to be aware of. If this is something that you're going to sell, and I would assume on pencils this expensive, you're going to want to sell the artwork. I think to be fair, you would need to let your clients know or your customers know that this needs to be, I would say, put this behind museum or the UV protecting glass. They're using a 5-star system. Each pencil is marked with that star, which I do love. I'm really, really glad that they made it easy to tell if that pencil is light fast. I don't have to do like you would with Prismacolor where I have to go look up a chart to find out if it's light fast. It's right there. One of the complaints that I had about the way that this company judges their light fastness for the Museum Aquarelle pencils is that they use a 5-star system, but I could not find anywhere on their website where they let you know that a 1-star is equivalent to what on the blue wall scale, or a 2-star is equivalent to what. Well, going through enough documentation, I found a brochure that isn't on their website, but it is their brochure that states that they, as far as how they consider the blue wool scale in relation to those 5 stars, it looks like the 5-star would be a 7-8 on the blue wool scale, a 4-star would then be a 6, a 3-star would be a 4 or 5, which is getting kind of low, a 2-star would be a 2 or 3, and a 1-star would be then a 1 on the blue wool scale. I don't know why they didn't put this on their website so we could find it more easily. 60 pencils in the set are a 5-star, so that's good. 10 rank a 4-star, 5 are ranked a 3, and only 1 is ranked a 2. I may have those numbers off a little bit because I had to sit there and count on their chart, and I'll have a link to the chart of the light fast ratings for you in the video description. I had a bit of a hard time finding it on their website, so I'll just put that link directly there. Now these pencils are the most expensive that I saw. Maybe there's more expensive out there, but from what I was researching when I was going to buy some, they were definitely on the high end. Right now, at the time of recording this video, the set of 76 is available on Amazon for $277. It's $285 right around there at Dick Blick. The Amazon prices you've got to watch because the price may be one thing one day and the next day it's up $100. So always double check with an art supply store to see which place you're going to get the better deal. I personally got the wood box. I paid $310 for the wood box, and the day after I ordered mine, it went up to $400. And then the next day it was up to almost 2 days later, it was up to almost $500. So like I said, watch those prices. But the wood box I've seen for as low as $275, which is cheaper than the ones in the regular cardboard tin or whatever they sell them in. With the wood box, if you are considering getting it, I will say it is beautiful. I am so glad I got it. I love the way the trays lift out. I can easily find the pencils that I'm looking for. It's just a very, very nice way to display them and really easy to organize. So I really, really liked this box. These are available open stock. I do not recommend buying these open stock on Amazon. They typically are going to run you about $10 a piece. So I definitely would get these at either Jerry's Artorama or Dick Blick. Dick Blick, they're $4.39 a piece, or if you're buying 12 or more open stock, they are $3.95. So you can get them for about $4 a piece over there. They're a little on the pricey side. Hi, I like to under-exaggerate things. I sold a toe to buy these. Don't ask why someone wanted to buy a toe. If you're supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where I've got the 2-hour-long version, 2.5. I don't know, it's long, version of this video available for you now, along with some real-time clips so you can really see what I'm doing there. If you're unfamiliar with Patreon, every week I upload a new 1 to 2 hour long tutorial, along with some other rewards. I've also got over 150 of those videos available for you to watch right now. I have a video library if you just want to see what's available before you sign up. I'll have that linked in the video description, and you can see if that's something that is interesting to you. But that is a lot of tutorials for $4. Now let's move on to this demonstration and talk more about what I liked and disliked about these pencils. My first impression when I started working on this, I was using what was a pretty dark purple for the center base portion of the anemone, and I just could not get that dark enough, no matter how many layers I applied. And that's definitely one thing that's different between, say, Inktense, which is permanent, and a watercolor pencil, because what was happening is I could get additional pigment by layering on top of layering, but you can only go so far because you keep reactivating the previous layers to some extent. Whereas with something like Inktense, that's permanent and it's really easy to build up to super dark areas. And I did run, that was a challenge for me on mainly, I think it may have just been that purple pencil. I never did get that center of the base anemone quite as dark as I wanted it to be. Now, when I started off, I expected this to be a little bit more like the Derwent watercolor pencils were, where they felt more like watercolor. So I thought that this would all flow through really loosely and I wouldn't end up with a ton of detail in the background. These, being more opaque, the way that they layer, I find that if you want a bit more control, a bit more definition and things, it was easier for me to do with these than with the Derwent watercolor pencils. But that doesn't necessarily mean, I think I mentioned this earlier, that one is better or worse. It's just there is a difference in the look. And so for me, I'm glad that I have both sets, because depending on the look that I want for a specific painting, that's going to determine which pencil I choose. So with this one, going through, I'm just layering my first layers for the base. Now, when you're working with watercolor pencils, I do recommend start lighter than you think you're going to want to go and build up to your darks. It's really, really easy to darken things up. Well, other than that purple, apparently, but it's normally very easy to darken things up. But lightening things up can be a bit more of a challenge depending on how much they lift. These have some lift, not as much as some watercolors that I've used, but you're not going to, or at least on this paper, I didn't find I was going to lift a whole lot when an area was too dark. But for the most part for this, my big struggle was just, not even struggle besides the purple, but I mean, I worked from light to dark, so I was continuously just deepening up colors, darkening things up as I went along. So when you lay out the color, as you can see here, it is really, really pale. That's going to get much darker when you add water to it. So definitely be aware of that. These dissolve beautifully. That was probably, I think, one thing about these pencils that make them so amazing. When the water was added, it just dissolved. I mean, so much more so than even the Derwent Inktense pencils. Those don't dissolve like this. Even the Derwent watercolor, they didn't dissolve quite to the extent that these did. This was amazing how smooth that they all of this blended out just so nicely. But look, as I blend each of these brush strokes, you can definitely still see you're not getting that really loose watercolor feel that I got doing the same type of pencil stroke and layering and blending using the same brushes with the Derwent watercolor pencils. So I dry in between every single layer, and then I'm going to go ahead and go on top of that, blend that out. Now see how much darker that gets? Make sure you're testing your pencils on a scratch piece of paper, because what they look like dry is very different than what they look like when water is added. And that will lighten up a bit as it does dry. So it won't be quite as dark as it is when the water is still wet. Next layer, blending that out. For the most part, I found the same thing with these that I did with the Derwent watercolor pencils. I really like my Taklon bristled filbert brushes for the majority of blending, or the Taklon bristled rounds. My brain shut off for a second there. But the Taklon bristled brushes had a good, as far as how stiff or soft they were, it was a nice balance. I tried some softer watercolor pencils. Well, I didn't actually try stiffer brushes. I know I don't want that for this, but I liked the slightly more stiff, that Taklon bristle, than with the softer watercolor pencils. I felt like I had brushes. I felt like I had a lot more control. I also used my Derwent water brushes a lot on this. When I got into the smaller areas, I really like those bristles for watercolor pencils, both with the Caran and with the Derwent watercolor. Now this area here is a good example that was very different. I thought I was going to get a much more loose look for the area under the clownfish, more like what I got with the lionfish that I did with the Derwent watercolor pencils. But I didn't. It was much more controlled, and I ended up, once I realized that's what was going to happen, initially I wanted a looser feel, but once I realized that it didn't really spread quite the same as the watercolor pencils did, I just went with it and went ahead and cleaned up and created an out of focus look for the live rock that's behind that anemone, and that worked out really well. I found I had a bit more control. My lines were sharper. Again, that's not necessarily that means they're better or worse than the Derwent watercolor. It's just a difference in both pencils. And normally I can tell you I hands down liked one better than the other, and I didn't in this case. It was really a matter of what look I was going, like what look you prefer with watercolor pencils. So I'm starting to build up these anemone, the little arms there. And as I build up these areas, I'm going to make them fairly basic. They're going to look very flat. I'll come through and add detail and really correct my values, how light my lights are, how dark my darks are, once I get the white of the paper covered. But I'm going to go through all of these pretty quickly. The white pencil is amazing with these. It's super opaque. Really, really like that. That is one pencil. The next time that I place an online art supply purchase, I'm going to be buying a few more of those white pencils because I have a feeling I'm going to go through those pretty quickly. And there's that white. You can see it's so opaque. Again, I am letting this dry in between every single layer. If you work the pencil on the wet paper, yeah, the pencil will come out super rich. It is a technique some people will use. I don't like to because it damages the tooth of the paper and it can make it easier to get additional layers. Just the way that the paper, it kind of almost fuzzes up, especially with this. This is the Fabriano Artistico Extra White Hot Press 140-pound watercolor paper that came in the watercolor blocks, except my block fell apart, so won't be purchasing that one again. So this one, I don't know that this will be my go-to paper. I will likely end up choosing it. I'm probably going to really like the arches. From what I tried with the small piece of arches, I really like that one, so I'm probably going to switch over to that for all of my watercolor pencils and Inktense. So you've got to darken this one up a lot. You really, in something like this where all the colors, I mean, the whole piece it's a very limited color palette. So in order to separate one area from the next, I have to pay close attention to my values, get my darks dark enough, my lights light enough. A phrase you hear me say all the time, but it's one of the most important things in your painting. The way that you get your lighting, the way that you get your values is so important. It can really make or break a painting. And I found that I could be really sloppy, really messy with these pencils. It's not like working with regular colored pencil, wax or oil-based pencils where I need a sharp point all the time. With these, I was able to have a more dull point throughout this, and I was able to work the pencil in a very sketchy manner back and forth. I could have harsh start and stop points. Once I blended with water, it all blended out smoothly. So it was nice because I got this done fairly quickly for how big it was. That's something that I think is a huge bonus with these pencils, and one of the reasons that you're going to see me using them a lot more is that I can get a very similar look to the wax and oil base, but oh my gosh, it's faster. Of course, the wax and oil based are going to be more light fast in most cases, so that's also something to consider as far as these pencils when the water is added. Now, as I'm going through this, I am using a hairdryer to dry this in between the layers. It's not just to speed the drying time, but it helps pull the paper back into shape. I did not pre-size this paper at all. Being that it was on a watercolor block, you really shouldn't have had to. But this one, I am seeing quite a bit of warping in the paper, so you can see it's taped all the way around the side. So as long as I take the hairdryer to it when it's wet, that seemed to pull most of it back into shape really nicely. Much more so than if I let it air dry. It didn't go back into shape as well. You look here, compare this to the finished painting, how flat all of this looks. Look at the difference when I'm going to go back through and adjust my values more. It's easy to think, okay, I have pigment, there's color on everything, so it must be done. No, don't look at it that way. When you think you're done, I always, depending on what it is, I will generally give myself 1 to 2 more hours of working on a project. That's why you'll usually see that I sign my artwork before I'm finished with it. Because I'll sign it, think I'm done, and then I'm always going to come back, give it more time, because I can almost always find more stuff that I can really improve on. just by taking that break. It's so easy to sit for hours in front of your artwork and you start to lose sight of what you're doing sometimes. So if you can take a break, come back after you think it's finished and make some adjustments. And you can, when you're working on that last hour, flip your artwork upside down, your artwork in your reference photo, flip it upside down. You will notice things you did not even notice before. You can also take a photo of it on your smartphone. When that image is shrunk down, you notice a lot of things you may not have noticed. Also, when you take that photo with your smartphone, mess around with the filters, see what happens, or the curves, mess around with the contrast, the lighting, see if it looks better if you darken areas up or if you lighten things up. Mess around with that in a photo editing app, and then if you like how it looks better, go back and do that to your artwork. It sometimes can make you feel more brave in trying something, because it is scary to look at something and feel like, okay, it's good enough how it is. I'm afraid if I make an area darker that it's going to be worse. No, don't do that. Be brave in that, because that's being brave enough to get your darks dark enough, get your lights light enough. That will really set your artwork apart. So now I'm coming through, I've used a blue, a really light blue, along the edges for some of these little tentacle guys. And look at how they almost glow now. That, just adding the blue, that pale blue up against the orange made such a difference in pushing those out, making them stand out more. Now, another really, really nice thing with these pencils, they're just like gouache. I really do want to call them more gouache pencils than I do watercolor, because to me, they so much seem closer to that. But they photograph beautifully, so nicely, because there's no glare. So it is really easy to get a very, very accurate photo of your finished artwork, which if you're making prints is wonderful. So if you're like me and you're kind of like, I don't know if I feel comfortable selling this, I'm not sure how long they're going to last, mean that I did add water to them, so those light fast ratings don't mean the same thing. I can still make prints, and this one will be an upcoming Patreon postcard. I think it'll print beautifully too. It photographed wonderfully. So that is a really, really good thing about working in a medium like this. It's so quickly that you could get a lot of prints done very quickly. So starting on the clownfish, I'm going to break this up into one section at a time. So I'm going to work just on his tail. It's easy to think, I'm going to work on the whole body all at once. It gets overwhelming. Break it up into one section at a time. The other thing that you want to watch is that it's easy to look at something like this and go, okay, it's a clownfish. I just need to find the perfect shade of orange, and that's what's going to make my clownfish look realistic. No, look at how many values in here. I've got some reddish brown colors. I've got some plum colors, oranges, yellows. There are so many different values and shades in this guy. The other thing is, look at the white. Look how dark I made the white stripes on him. When you compare that up against the white, and even what is there is going to need to be a lot darker than what I've got. You'll see me go back several times and darken up those white stripes. You very rarely want to leave something, even though we know it's a clownfish, the stripes are white. You know that, and your brain is going to want to force you to just use white. Don't. White is reflective. It's going to pick up what's around it. And so if you want something to look more realistic, whether it's a flower or the stripes on a clownfish, you're not going to use a whole lot of white. Same thing if you're drawing people. The whites of the eye, not white. The brightest white will be the shine mark on the eye, but the whites of the eye are not very white at all. So just be aware of that in whatever it is that you're painting or drawing. So again, now I'm not lightening this up a bit. I've got some oranges and yellows in with the reds. Now for the edge, I'm using this deep plum color where the black is going to be. I'll put black on top of that, but this way I'm able to control and have it fade. So instead of just having the black up into the orange, black and orange, they don't look so great when they mix together. So by putting the magenta first, or this deep plum color first, I can put the black in the darkest areas, but I can make this the color that fades into the orange, because I do need a fade from the black into the orange. But the black itself into the orange, I'm probably going to get a very muddy look that I do not want. So that is why I'm using this magenta color first, or deep plum. This fin needs to be really light, so I'm using much, much lighter oranges just because of the way that the light is hitting that fin. See how sketchy it is? But look, when I blend out, you can't see any of those pencil lines. I love that. I love being lazy, but you can't tell that I was lazy. Artist pro tips. So I'm going to go ahead and darken that up now. And the first layer was way too light. That's okay. It's really easy to go back and deepen that color up. No problem. Darkening up again. Now I'm starting to get a few of those little lines. I don't care if the lines in the fin are exact to my reference photo. I don't really care if any of this is exact to my reference photo. I just need close. I just need to make sure it's going in the right direction. I didn't sit there and count how many lines I needed there. It's not that big of a deal. I just want that hint of the texture or the ridges in that fin. And same thing here, using that deep plum or deep, I don't remember the name of the pencil. It's not black though, that's the point. And you guys know, I am a fan of using black paint, black pencils, but I don't leave them by themselves. I layer them with other colors so that they don't look really flat. That's that Derwent watercolor brush again. I need to contact them because I'm pretty sure I want that brush in every size available. I love those things. They hold water in the back end and you just squeeze it a little bit to get the water to come out on the bristles. And for watercolor pencils and even Inktense, I don't know why I've never used them on Inktense before, but I'm pretty sure you're going to see me use them all the time for those now. I may have used them a couple of times, but not as much as my other brushes, and I think I'm going to. The more I use them, the more I love them. I've got a lot of red here in the face. Now this is a color, I'm pulling out this deeper red, or it's kind of a reddish orange, but I'm pulling that out more where it wasn't in the back end of the fish. And this is letting the face and that front fin really stand out. So not only is the face and the fin standing out because of how much brighter it is than the back portion of the body of the fish, but also because it's a different color. I'm working on darkening this purple up again. I'm going to work on this several times before I get it dark enough. I ended up having to pull a lot of blue in there. And looking back, if I were to do that again, I would probably find a deeper, a more highly pigmented red and blue from the set and use that instead. I think that would give me the results that I was trying to get with the dark. I don't know why I was being stubborn and just determined that the dark purple was going to be as dark as I wanted. I think I could have corrected that by mixing my own. Really, again, working on those values, get those darks dark enough. Look at that face. How many values, how many shades of reds into orange, into yellow, burgundy? There's so many colors in there. It is not just one shade of orange. If you do that, it will look like a cartoon. Trying to get this even darker, failing. Drying that because the paper is warping. You can see it start to pull itself back into shape. Now here I decided I needed to darken up the back portion or the live rock underneath the clownfish so that the clownfish was pushed forward. The reference photo that I took, this was a photo that I took myself. With that photo, the background was a little bit on the lighter side. I wanted it to be a lot darker so that that clownfish really popped forward. So I did change that a bit. Now, this is what's interesting. Look at the white stripes. You saw when it was up against the white of the paper, I darkened those quite a bit. And now that I've got orange up against it, I can see those are way too light. So I've got to darken those up a lot in order to get the values where they should be. But when I was up against the white of the paper, it was a lot harder to judge whether or not that was correct. So I went a little bit too light, knowing I can go back and darken it easy enough. So now I'm starting to come back through and I can take actual black in the really dark areas and look at now how that just pops out. But I don't need to put it everywhere. I'm letting some of that deep plum show through here and there. And I don't have to worry about this blending and mixing in with the orange where I don't want it because I've already done that blending and shading with that deep purple or deep plum. Going just along that to blend that out. And really, it's not even so much blending, it just makes the color really dark by adding water to it. Everything that I do is done in layers.
this isn't a paint by number. You're going to get a very different result if you're trying to paint or draw things in a paint by number way. I've just put the right color in the right spot. It will look very different. It tends to have more of a plastic rough look, and it is a technique you can use. I mean, I've seen artwork done that way that's gorgeous. But for this style, for this type of realism, you're generally going to want to do things in layering. Lots and lots of layer. And if you have a layer that doesn't look good, it's no big deal. Add another layer. Keep layering until it looks good. A bad layer doesn't mean that anything is ruined. It just means that you're not finished. Taking that white pencil, getting some highlights there for the edges of the fins. And if you look back at this, how many stages of this clownfish you could have said, okay, it looks done to me, but you keep layering, you keep building, and it looks so much better as you continue to do that. If you are like me and you've painted with watercolor before, but it really wasn't your thing, you felt like, I don't know, for me, I felt like it was too hard for me to control. I didn't have enough control with it. I'm used to acrylics. That's very easy for me to control. Or with colored pencils. Colored pencils are easy to control, but colored pencils, maybe those are too slow for you. This is something in between that is such a fun medium to work in. It's fast like painting, but it's a bit easier to control because you're applying that pigment with a paint or with a pencil instead of a paintbrush, and the way that you can layer and you've got time for blending. I think that this is going to be a really good medium for a lot of people who don't necessarily want to paint with oils or acrylics or even watercolor themselves, but that colored pencils are too slow for them. Definitely give these a shot. And these, because they're available open stock, the same thing with the Derwent drawing, because they're available open stock, you can just get a handful of them, 12 pencils, and try those out. See how you like them, because you can mix a lot with just a few pencils. You don't have to have the full set. Of course, if you can afford it, I do recommend getting the full set. I like to have as many colors as possible. You won't regret it. But if you just want to give it a test and see if you like it, if you get a handful, maybe 10 to 12 pencils, I think that that is enough to complete a project and get a really good idea of whether or not this is a medium that is going to be right for you.
I've recorded this video like 5 times. Okay, that's an over-exaggeration. Oh, wow, I can't talk because I've recorded it so many times. I've recorded this 4 times. One time the SD card ran out. Another time I forgot to hit record on the audio, and it was just one problem. It's one of those days of me not paying attention to what I'm doing. Clearly should have had more coffee. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every week. That's a lie. YouTube's not updating people. You may also want to click on the bell notification, and then it has a little drop down and you can tell it how often you want to be notified of my videos, which sometimes doesn't work either. In which case, last plan, sign up for my email newsletter. That is free. I send out a newsletter once a week that'll update you with anything new that came that week and live streams that are coming up.